Hey guys, not sure this is actually working, but we're going to give it a shot. Bear with me. I know this is a tough time for everybody. It's a stressful situation. I'll try and make these videos um, brief as I can. We're going to go ahead and skip the rest of the torts unit, and we're going to jump directly to contracts. I'll be getting you guys some assignments, basically just defining terms and things like that as I get up to speed. I still have to go to work every day, so we'll get this done as quickly and efficiently as possible. I know these videos are going to be kind of boring, but bear with me. I'll try not to make them the full 50 minutes each video. So anyway, we're going to start today with contracts. And the first question that I usually ask the class is, what is a contract? And I typically get answers like, well, it's a promise, an agreement to pay somebody for some type of service. The most basic definition of a contract that I'll give you guys today is a contract is an enforceable promise. Now, it's important to distinguish between just a promise, a garden variety promise, and an enforceable promise. So the example that I typically give is I'll pick a student in class and I'll say, hey, I'll take you to Hardee's after class today and buy you a biscuit. And the student says, yeah, that's great. I'd love to have a biscuit. So the question becomes is, do we then have a contract? I've offered to drive him to Hardee's and buy him a biscuit, and he's accepted that offer. And so the question becomes again, is that an enforceable contract? And the answer is no. And we'll get to why the answer is no here in just a minute. So we all make all sorts of promises to one another all the time, right? I'll meet you at the caf in half an hour. I'll pick you up at 6:30. All sorts of promises, from large promises to small promises. But we don't sue if those promises aren't kept, right? We don't sue for breach of contract if I don't pick you up at 6 o'clock or take you to Hardee's and buy you a biscuit as I promised to do. And the reason for that is, try not to touch my face every 5 seconds. And the reason for that is because those are not enforceable promises. So what distinguishes an enforceable promise from just a garden variety promise? And the answer gets to the heart of what a contract is. And the answer is something called consideration, or quid pro quo. You might have heard the Latin term. And essentially what a quid pro quo or consideration in a contract is I agree to do something for you in exchange for you agreeing to do something for me. And without both parties agreeing to do something or not do something or give something up, without that, you just have a garden variety promise that's not enforceable. But when you have that consideration or you have that quid pro quo, then you have a contract. So back to the Hardee's example. Again, garden variety promise, hey, I'll take you to Hardee's after class and buy you a biscuit. Hey, great, thanks very much, Mr. Shryock. Appreciate that. I don't do it, you can't sue me. Why? Because there's no consideration. I've agreed to do something, but you haven't agreed to do anything in exchange. So no contract. But if we provide the quid pro quo, if we provide the consideration, then we're going to have an enforceable promise. Then we're going to have a contract. So, change the example slightly. Colin. Hi, Colin. I will take you to Hardee's and buy you a biscuit if you pay me $12. And Colin says, sure. Now we have consideration. Each party, myself and Colin, are bringing something to the table, or a bargain for exchange, a quid pro quo, the consideration of the contract. My consideration is I've agreed to take Colin to Hardee's and buy him a biscuit. His consideration, what he's bringing to the table, is he's going to pay me $12. So when I make that offer and he accepts it, we have a contract. We have an enforceable promise. If I don't take him to Hardee's and buy him a biscuit, technically he could sue me for breach of contract. Now this is a silly example. Obviously no one's going to sue over $12 or a biscuit from Hardee's. But the illustration of what a consideration is in a contract and what sets apart an ordinary promise from a contract is there. Colin's paying me $12. I'm driving him to Hardee's to buy him a biscuit. Without each of us bringing something to the table, we don't have an enforceable contract. Excuse me. As you guys know, I'm a smoker, so don't be concerned when I cough. So, that's the basic idea of what sets a promise, an ordinary garden variety promise, apart from an enforceable contract. There are 4 elements to every contract. They are agreement, consideration, which we just briefly touched upon, capacity, which refers to basically one's mental ability to enter into an agreement, and legality. And as we'll learn as we go through the contracts unit, all contracts have to call for something legal. Now I've written down on a piece of paper those 4 elements of a contract, and I'll put them up on the screen just briefly. You guys can pause the video to check it out and write these down because you will, well, they're like backwards. I don't know whether you guys can, maybe if I upside down. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm doing the best I can, you guys. Bear with me. I don't know how that'll show up on your screen. But agreement, consideration, capacity, and legality are the 4 elements of every contract. Let's start with agreement. Nothing really complicated there, but how do the 2 parties to a contract reach an agreement? And the answer is offer and acceptance. I'll say that again because you want to write it down. Offer and acceptance. One party makes an offer and the other party accepts it. If they do accept it, then you have your contract. Now, let me stop there for 1 second. Some of you are probably thinking, well, in order to have a contract, it has to be in writing. And that's not true. Oral contracts, as a general rule, are enforceable to the same extent that a written contract is. Now, we'll get to something called the statute of frauds, which requires that certain types of contracts have to be in writing in order to be enforced. And we'll go through those more specifically, but generally, a contract for the sale of any interest in real estate, a contract that takes more than 1 year to fully perform. And you're going to hear that term perform and performance when we talk about contract. And when we say performance or perform, we're talking about doing what the contract calls for you to do. In other words, if a party is said to have fully performed their end of the contract, then they've done everything that they're supposed to do in order to live up to that contract. So in our Hardee's example, I fully perform when I take Colin to get his biscuit at Hardee's, and Colin fully performs when he pays me the $12. So back to offer and acceptance. One party makes an offer and the other party accepts. There you have your agreement. It's as simple as that. Let me back up again. Sorry guys, I'm a little flustered. It doesn't have to be in writing in order to be enforceable. So again, just saying to Colin, hey, I'll do this if you do that. If he says yes, we have an agreement. We have our first element of a valid contract agreement. Again, some contracts do have to be in writing in order to be enforced. Contract for the sale of an interest in real estate, contract that can't be fully performed within 1 year, a promise to pay the debt of someone else, all of these things. There's a couple more we'll get to when we get to the statute of frauds. But aside from those, and the sale of goods over $500, under the Uniform Commercial Code. And we'll get to the Uniform Commercial Code, or the UCC, as we progress. So, back to agreement. Offer and acceptance. Now, once an offer is made, it has to be accepted before it can be create a contract. So, for example, if I say to Colin, I'll take you to Hardee's and buy you a biscuit if you pay me $12, if he says, no thank you, obviously we don't have a contract. If he says, well, I don't know, we don't have a contract. But if he indicates acceptance of that offer by saying yes, or otherwise indicating that he's agreeing to the terms of that offer, then we have our contract. There are certain requirements for an offer to be valid. And the first is a serious intent to be bound. So in other words, offers made in jest or under undue excitement can't be accepted. For example, I go out to start my car, it doesn't start up right away, it's let's just say it's a $30,000 car, and I get upset and I kick the tires and I say, I'd sell this piece of junk for $5. And a passerby says, I accept. Do we then have a contract? We have our offer and we have our acceptance. But the answer is no, because I didn't have a serious intent to be bound by that offer. I was pissed off. I didn't really want to sell my car, and it should be obvious to everyone that wasn't the case. I was under undue excitement, upset my car wouldn't start, and that wasn't a serious offer. The second requirement of a valid offer is there has to be definite terms. Now, what are definite terms? Sometimes it can be really simple. If I say to Colin, I'll sell you my car for $500, and Colin says yes, those terms are definite enough, assuming I only own one car. Now, if I own 5 cars, and I say to Colin, I'll sell you my car for $500, and he accepts, he says, yes, I'll buy your car for $500. Those terms aren't definite enough to get us to that offer and acceptance that we need to form an agreement, because I may be talking about a different car than Colin is. Again, if I own 5 cars, which car am I talking about? So we don't have the definite terms there that we need. Another example that typically comes up with regard to the requirement of definite terms of an offer often has to do with quantity. So, for example, if I say to you, I'll sell you eggs for $100, and you say, I accept. Well, we're lacking a quantity term there, so we really don't have an agreement. We don't have a valid offer and acceptance. I may be thinking about 4 dozen eggs. He may be talking about 12 dozen eggs. So certain types of offers have to have that quantity term. Excuse me. Really, one of the ways that we think about an agreement is what we refer to as a meeting of the minds when we talk about offer and acceptance. Do the 2 parties to the contract have a meeting of the minds with regard to what the terms of the actual contract are? And oftentimes it's pretty simple. Again, I own 1 car, I'll sell you my car for $500, I accept, or the other party accepts, no problem. It gets more complicated again when we're dealing with items that require a quantity term, or, for example, the sale of an ongoing business. What all does that sale entail? Are you buying all of the assets of the business? Are you buying all of the liabilities of the business? The more valuable the more valuable the deal is, probably the more specificity you're going to have. If you think about it, we all enter into contracts to one extent or another all the time. Anybody that leases an apartment or a house has a lease agreement with his or her landlord. And that lease agreement is a contract between the tenant and the landlord. The tenant offers to lease you an apartment for $1,000 a month. You pay all the utilities. You accept. You have a lease agreement. Lease agreements are affected by a number of laws, including warranties for habitability and things like that we don't need to get into at this point. But suffice it to say that if you rent the place where you live, you have a contract with your landlord. Each and every one of you has a contract with Davis and Elkins College. What are the terms of that contract? And basically they are, you agree to pay the college your tuition, and they agree to provide you a diploma, assuming you complete the required coursework as outlined in the college catalog. You have to take so many credit hours, you have to take specific classes. But as long as you do that and pay your tuition, the college is contractually obligated to give you a diploma once you complete that coursework and paid all your bills, paid all of your tuition. When you go into a store and buy something, you're essentially contracting with that store. So think about going into Kroger or Walmart and buying a gallon of milk. They put the gallon of milk out with a specific price. You pick that up, you take it to the checkout aisle, and you pay the given price, and you get to take the milk home. And think about it too. I mean, this is a pretty good example. Is there are certain implied things that are going on there, right? So, for example, think if you get that milk home and you open it up and it's spoiled. What are you going to do? You're going to go back to Kroger and either exchange it for some milk that isn't bad, or get a refund. And assuming the milk is in fact spoiled, then you're not going to have any problem doing that. And that's basically because you have a contract with Kroger. You pay this much for the milk, and an implied part of that contract is the milk not be spoiled. So anyway, back to our agreement. I'm having a hard time staying with one train of thought. So agreement is the first element of any valid contract, this meeting of the minds, offer and acceptance. Now, we've talked a little bit about what you need to have an offer, and so then the question becomes, how do you accept an offer? Well, the easy way is just say, yes, I accept. And that's typically the way we reach acceptance, an express affirmation or indication that you want to enter into the contract. If you say no to an offer, there is no contract. If you say, well, maybe, there is no contract. If you make a counter offer, now this gets a little bit tricky. So let's say I'm at Elkins Ford Land and I want to buy a new Ford truck. And the dealership says to me, we'll sell you this new Ford F-150 for $42,000. And I say, well, I'll give you $40,000. What I've done is made a counter offer. Now, what happens when I make that counter offer is important. The person who makes the offer is called the offeror, and the person to whom the offer is made is called the offeree. And we'll see as we progress why it's important to be able to identify. It's not difficult, but it's important to identify who is the offeror and who is the offeree. So Ford Land, under this example, starts out as the offeror. I'll sell you this F-150 for $42,000. They're the offeror, I'm the offeree. Once they make that offer, I can accept it, I can reject it, or I can make a counter offer. In this example, I've made a counter offer by saying, hey, I'll give you $40,000. Now, what happens is now I'm the offeror, and Elkins Ford Land is the offeree. So now it's on them to accept, reject, or make another counter offer. So they made the offer at $42,000. They were the offeror. I made a counter offer. Make sure I get my numbers right. Ford Land made the initial offer at $42,000. I come back with a counter offer at $40,000. Now they're the offeree. They come back with another counter offer. They say, well, I'll sell it to you for $41,000. Now they're back to being the offeror again, and I'm the offeree, and I have the obligation to accept that offer, reject that offer, or make another counter offer. Let's just say, for purposes of example, at that point, I say 41,000. Great, I've accepted the offer, and we have a contract on the new truck. One of the questions that arises is, how long does an offeree have to accept an offer before it's no longer a valid offer? And that's a little bit of a tricky question, as the law will typically impose what we'd say is a reasonable amount of time. Well, what's a reasonable amount of time? I can't give you an exact number of days or hours or minutes. And I think a lot of it would depend on what the nature of the proposed contract is. If it's something simple for a relatively small amount of money, the law will imply that you need to give an answer promptly. If we're talking about the sale of a $5 million ongoing business, that's typically not something that somebody can accept without a lot of due diligence being done, taking your time to make sure it's a fair deal. So the law would imply a much longer time, I believe, for something like that. Now, you can, by the very terms of the offer, hold it open for as long as you want, essentially. So I could phrase an offer like, I'll sell you my car for $15,000. You need to let me know within 24 hours whether or not you wish to accept that offer. Thus, by the very terms of the offer, I've given the offeree the right to take 24 hours to accept, if they want to, that offer. And you'll see that occasionally in something that we call an option contract. And an option contract basically gives someone the right to enter into that contract for an extended period of time. So the example that I typically give is, let's say I'm a movie producer, I've written a movie script, and I'm shopping it around to the major Hollywood studios. And in order to make this movie, it's going to require a large investment from the movie studio. And so I get them the script, and they say, well, we really like this script, and we want to make this into a movie, but it's going to cost us, $20 million to make this into a movie, and we're not quite ready to make that commitment. So what we'll do is we'll enter into kind of a side contract with you, an option contract, where they'll say, we'll give you $20,000 to give us the exclusive right to make this movie for the next year. So anytime within that next year, they can exercise that option and make that movie, or they can let the time expire, and then at that point you'll have the option, you'll have the legal right to shop it to another movie studio. So really, you have a side contract. And let's look at this for a minute, considering what we talked about with quid pro quo and consideration. What's the consideration for that option contract? The movie studio is paying $20,000. That's their consideration. I am giving them the right to make that movie for the next year. They have to let me know within the next year. So that's what I'm giving them. They're giving me money. I'm giving them the right to that script for a year. And so that's a good illustration of extending the time, or forming another contract, an option contract, to extend the time to really accept the offer. And it's supported by valid consideration because, excuse me, because each side is bringing something to the table. We have the necessary quid pro quo. Okay, so we're back to agreement. Now, once an offer is made, if it's not accepted right away, the offeror has the right to revoke that offer any time before it's accepted. Okay? So what does that mean? If I say to Colin, I'll sell you my car for $500, and he says, well, I'll think about it. I'll let you know by tomorrow. If at any point prior to him accepting that offer, I revoke the offer. In other words, I call up Colin and say, that offer I made you earlier today, it's revoked. Once an offer is revoked, it can no longer be accepted. So if I revoke the offer and then Colin calls me the next day and says, hey, I do want to buy your car now for $500. He's made me another offer. We've started all over again. Well, he hasn't made me another offer. He's made me an offer. I understand it's the one he's already rejected, but he can do that, and then I can accept or reject or say I don't know with regard to buying my car for $500. So, offer and acceptance gets us to an agreement. It gets us to a meeting of the minds. The next element of a valid contract, we've touched on a little bit, is consideration. Each party needs to bring something to the table, whether it's money or a promise to do something, a promise to not do something. And it can be pretty much anything. So this will be a little bit repetitive, but consideration can be an agreement, or consideration can be agreeing to do something, agreeing not to do something that you have a right to do. So we could illustrate that with all sorts of silly examples. It doesn't have to be money or goods. It could be anything. So I could say to Colin, I'll give you $500 if, when we all get back to school, you stand in the middle of the campus center and sing Yankee Doodle Dandy. I'll give you $500 if you do that. And he accepts. Now, do I derive any economic benefit by him standing in the campus center and singing Yankee Doodle Dandy? No. But if he does it, I'm obligated to pay him the $500 because he doesn't have to. There's nothing that obligates him to sing Yankee Doodle Dandy in the campus center. Again, it's a silly example, but it illustrates if you agree to do something, you do something that you're not already obligated to do, it's perfectly good consideration. Okay? Courts will not, under most circumstances, unless there's an allegation of fraud, look and see, well, was that a good deal? Was it worth $500 for him to stand up and sing Yankee Doodle Dandy? Courts aren't going to consider that, and we call that adequacy of consideration. And courts generally do not engage in examinations of whether or not the consideration was adequate. People are free to contract. We say we have freedom of contract, and that means you're free to make a bad deal. And courts aren't going to bail you out of a bad deal as a general rule, again, unless you can show some type of fraud or coercion. Think about the implications of if courts were able to and willing to take a look at every deal that was ever done, and if it doesn't really seem like it's a good or fair deal to both the parties, then we're just going to get rid of the contract. It doesn't work that way. You can't run to court and say, hey, I paid too much for this, or I didn't get enough money for that, let me out of this contract. That's not how it works. Typically, parties enter into contracts because they derive some benefit from it. And we'll talk a lot about what happens when somebody breaches a contract. But remember when we do that the vast majority of contracts are not breached. We talk about when contracts are breached when we discuss contracts because it illustrates the points we're trying to make. But the overwhelming majority of contracts are not breached. Both parties fully perform, and everybody's happy. That might be overly optimistic, but they get what they expected to get out of the deal. So keep that in mind as we continue talking about contracts, that most contracts are not breached. Okay, so what are the types of things? Again, we went through the list of what can be valid consideration. Agreeing to not do something is perfectly good consideration if in fact you have a legal right to do it in the first place. So if I say to Colin, again, silly examples, but they illustrate the point. If I say to Colin, I'll give you $500 if you never wear the shoes that you have on in class today again to class. Now, and Colin says, I agree. and he never wears those shoes to class again, I owe him the $500 because agreeing not to wear those shoes, he has a legal right to wear those shoes. By him agreeing to that and then following through and fully performing and not wearing the shoes again, sorry, I just got a text message. That's perfectly valid consideration. And it also illustrates the other point. I mean, I don't derive any economic benefit from him not wearing those shoes, but the law doesn't care about that. The consideration from each side is there. I'm agreeing to pay $500. He's agreeing not to wear the shoes again. Now, let's take a look at an example of where you don't have a legal right to do something. So if I announce to the entire class, I will give each and every one of you $1,000 if you do not drink alcohol for the remainder of the semester. Perfectly valid consideration for those members of the class that are 21 years or older, but not good consideration for those that are under 21 years of age. Why? Because it's agreeing not to do something that you have a legal right to, and only those of you that are over 21 have a legal right to drink alcohol. So if you don't have that legal right to do it, and I ask you to refrain from doing it, that's not good consideration, because you're really not doing anything. But for those of you that are of legal drinking age, if you don't drink during that year-long period, it's a perfectly valid contract, and I would owe you the money. Again, courts don't care about adequacy of consideration. You can say, well, that's stupid. Who cares what shoes are worn? Who cares if he sings Yankee Doodle Dandy? It doesn't matter. Courts aren't going to back up and take a look at it. Again, people have the freedom to contract. I think that's a relatively good place to stop for now. That's a half-hour lecture. What I'd like you guys to do is go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I can't believe I even have a YouTube channel. But go ahead and subscribe and then comment. Just say, send me a message or something so I know you've looked at it. The college is asking me to have some way to confirm that you guys are watching this. I know that's not going to indicate that you watched this whole video, but I would appreciate it if each of you could comment on this, and then I can at least record that you've watched it. Now, let me take a couple minutes and talk about how we're going to proceed from here. I'll post 3 of these lectures a week. I'll try and have them available to you on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but I have to continue to work, so they may be somewhat haphazard. I may try and load a bunch at once, but as long as you guys are looking at 3 lectures a week, I'll be happy. I'll try and keep them to about a half hour, 40 minutes, because I know it's dry material to begin with, and I know you guys we all are under a lot of stress right now. We're going to be okay. I'm confident in that. So I don't want to overload you. Now, if you didn't do well on the first test, don't freak out, okay? Everybody's going to be okay this semester. These are trying circumstances, and we're going to make sure that you have every opportunity to do well in this class. Nobody's going to fail unless you just completely ignore everything. You'll be fine. We'll get through this, and hopefully you guys will learn something. I haven't figured out how we're going to do the testing yet, but we've got some time to figure that out. Again, if you have any questions or need anything, or just want to talk about any of the material or anything that I'll talk about in any of these videos, give me a call, shoot me a text, shoot me an email. I'll be available to you. The evenings are fine. I should be home by 5 or 6 o'clock every evening. And even if you contact me during the day, it shouldn't be a problem for me to get back to you as promptly as possible. I really don't want any of you guys to stress out about this test. We've got more important things on our minds right now, but we want to get through this semester and make sure you get your credit hours. I know this is a required course for business majors. I'll work on my video making skills, I promise. Try and be a little bit more organized in the future. Typically, I've been teaching this class for so long now, I kind of jump around from place to place. I'm going to have to revisit my notes so these lectures are a little bit more coherent and have a better flow to them. I'm not going to go back and watch this because I'm sure I'd be horrified. I mean, if any of you guys have constructive criticism, please let me know in the comments or shoot me a text. Y'all feel free in the comments to give me a hard time, comment on my appearance, anything that lets me know you guys are watching. I've got thick skin, so don't worry about it. I'm looking at this video and I'm seeing my yellow teeth. It's kind of nasty, but anyway, don't concentrate on my teeth. So again, we will get through this, all of us, I promise. It won't be too difficult. One thing I will ask is, of course, you're probably not out and about, hopefully, but think about any contracts that you've ever entered into. We use the example of buying stuff at the store, your contract with the college, a landlord-tenant relationship, those types of things. Think about if you've ever entered into a contract. All of you have, whether you know it or not. But it may be in the comments. Give me an example of any contract that you've entered into here recently or at any point. Yeah, that would be great. I'd really appreciate it if you guys would do that. Even if it's just like landlord-tenant, or I have a lease, or anything you can think of. Again, I've already given you the example of with the college. If you can't think of anything, that's fine. So remember, leave a comment. Everybody needs to, even if it's just say here, whatever you want to, give me a hard time, comment on my appearance. All that is great to let me know you're watching this video. I promise you they'll get better as I get more experience in doing this. And I'm going to try and shoot you all an email right now to get you to subscribe to my my freaking YouTube channel. I never thought I'd have a YouTube channel. I'm way too old for that. But anyway, thank you guys. I'm sorry that we have to meet under these circumstances. It's difficult for everybody. I know my son is a senior in high school this year, and he's concerned about is he going to have a graduation ceremony? Is he going to have a prom? And I'm sure that you guys have similar concerns, particularly you seniors. Promise you all, we'll get through this. You will all pass the class. Just make the effort to watch the videos. Let me know you're watching the videos. And I know I'm just repeating myself at this point. So I will sign off. God bless all of you guys. Again, let me know if you have any questions, concerns, comments, or whatever it is. And I look forward to seeing your comments on this video. So thanks, guys. Hang in there.